Coming from Central Kentucky, land of horses, bourbon, and basketball, straight to your ears, ChickenCoopGuides.com presents AgriCast Digest, your place to get news and information about anything agriculturally related. Please welcome your host, Gabrielle Yoder.
Hey folks, welcome to this week's episode of AgriCast Digest. I have a wonderful new guest for you this week, Tara Whitsitt of Fermentation on Wheels. And Miss Whitsitt, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. A little late, but better late than never, right? So you run Fermentation on Wheels, which you started a couple of years ago as kind of a really cool sort of tour bus that spreads the word about naturally fermented foods. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what made you decide to do this and what message you hope to spread?
So my primary mission is to make fermented food education more accessible to all ages and socioeconomic levels. So I also run my project as a charity. All of my events are open to the public by donation. And it's also a way to have fun, approach education in a very creative way, very versatile way. So I experiment with a lot of different types of ferments. And then even in the realm of vegetable fermentation, which is what I mostly teach since it is the most approachable ferment that I am working with right now. I am harvesting vegetables from farmers in nearby areas of the urban areas I work in. And so every time I'm making something a little different based on the local seasonal produce.
Okay, well, that's really good. So that's really making it personal to each community, kind of like the way it used to be centuries ago, decades ago. Each community would have kind of its own special fermentation, from what I've read anyway.
Yeah, and it's definitely, my project is also a way to try and bring the local communities together who have this common interest of traditional food processes. So that's been really fun too, bringing out people of different backgrounds who, wouldn't have met before until they heard about this, crazy bus coming to town. So I also, in addition to doing workshops, I do potluck events, which are a way to get interested beginners and also experts at one venue. I usually do these at urban farms, actually, and you get a very wide range of fermented foods, but then also those who have not started fermenting yet are bringing just complimentary dishes, and then they get to talk with people in their community. So after I leave, they're able to kind of carry on the conversation in a more intimate way with the people who are nearby.
Okay, so it sounds kind of like you're even just like Johnny Appleseeding it, kind of spreading little groups of people that can talk about it, like you said, while you're gone. That's really cool. So it's doing a lot more than just spreading the message. It seems it's kind of sustaining it and keeping it going.
Yeah, and that's definitely, part of my mission, part of the plan of why I do what I do.
Awesome. That is so cool. So now I'm sure you're very knowledgeable about bacterial biodiversity and why it's so important for humans. This is something I was thinking about because I had this conversation with Doug Kaufman a while back on a podcast, and how it's not the amount of good bacteria you have, but the diversity of it that actually affects your health in a positive way. So can you kind of discuss how people can get that diversity of bacteria through fermentation?
Yeah, sure. I'm a really big, I'm really big on mixing it up, variety. So, just simply speaking, eat everything in moderation. one of too much is never good. A lot of people ask, oh, well, how much kombucha should I be drinking every day to get healthier? How much sauerkraut should I be eating every day to get healthier? And it's, there's not one straight answer for each person. I mean, I personally think, finding a diet that works for you, that's part of your journey as a human, and becoming more aware of your body and its needs. But I definitely recommend that people introduce lots of different fermented foods into their diets slowly, a little every day, maybe every other day. And maybe some fermented foods don't work well with you, and maybe it's because there's something in your body that's already balancing what that fermented food would regularly provide. So yeah, it's going to be different for every person, but fermented foods are really good for you, and they do provide a lot of beneficial bacteria. Cheese and yogurt are some of the more common ferments that we consume, but fermented vegetables carry a lot of really good living qualities. So do bean ferments. I'm making tempeh today, which is a ferment that is very different and brings its own set of diversity in. Miso is another ferment that has a whole other set of bacterial qualities from the norm that's in our culture. But yeah, diversity is key, and I feel that it's very intuitive, for us as people. Like if you're consuming all dairy ferments, that's not a very diverse set of bacteria you're choosing from, or even food in general.
Yeah, I think I would agree. So now I discovered something interesting actually yesterday, because you mentioned miso. So you make your own miso. Do you get tamari as your side product? Because from what I understand, tamari is supposed to be like a side product or a byproduct of making miso. So, have you found that? Is that true? I haven't really investigated it much since then.
Yeah, tamari is a byproduct of miso. It's just it's the liquid, the like drip off. I call it the drip off of miso. So I ferment my misos for 1 year to 2 years. And while the beans and koji are fermenting, they ferment in a salty brine. And that brine is actually made with the cooked bean water from that original cooking of the beans before we ferment them. And so that brine is actually, the end product, it's tamari. And you don't get a lot of tamari from each miso batch. Unless you're producing a lot of miso. Like, I just make miso by the gallon. I make a lot of different types of miso. I experiment a lot. So, I don't usually have like a 5-gallon bucket going on my bus. Obviously my space is also limited. But yeah, you get tamari, and tamari is delicious, and miso is delicious too, and it's actually very easy to make. So hopefully once I get home, I can start kind of spreading the seed about these ferments that, people have found more difficult to make, but once you kind of get on the boat and you make you have a kind of habitual, like, this is how you make this, soaking the beans and just kind of integrating that into your everyday routine, and realizing how easy it is. Like, tempeh is especially good because it's such a great source of protein. I actually don't keep a lot of meat on my bus because it's hard to find to have access to the quality of meat I want all the time. And as a substitute, I make tempeh weekly, and it has just as much protein as like a steak. So it's worked out really well for me. And it's kind of just like getting into the mode of soaking the beans once a week, and then, the next day preparing them, and then watching over them for the course of the next 12 to 24 hours until they're done fermenting, and I have the solid bean cake.
Yeah, from what I understand, because normally I'm fairly anti-soy. However, fermentation of soybeans actually gets rid of a lot of the negative things about soy, like the phytoestrogens and things like that, and it makes it into a very healthy food. So I think that's really cool how you can kind of take something which may not be really great for you to eat in big quantities by itself, but if you ferment it, it makes it really healthy.
As a side note, I have yet to make a soy miso or a soy tempeh. So you don't need to use soybeans for these ferments. You can use azuki beans, black beans, kidney beans. You can even introduce grains in these ferments. So, they're very versatile. Like we found over time that you can experiment with a great variety. And, I started learning that about tempeh when I was in New York last summer, and I met a tempeh maker named Barry who is experimenting with all kinds of grains and beans, and it made me realize, why would I stick to just soy? Now that I know there's all this experimenting being done where it works without soy, so that's something to remember too.
That's really fascinating because I thought tempeh and miso. Well, now I knew miso could be made with rice as well, but I thought soy had to be in there. So that's very cool. So you could really pretty much use any bean, it sounds like. And beans themselves have phytic acid. So when you soak them, that removes most of the phytic acid. I think 90% of the phytic acid. Phytic acid is an anti-nutrient for our listeners. So it can actually prevent your body from absorbing nutrients. So the soaking process would be obviously part of the fermentation, and then you could use any bean. So that sounds really amazing. And then you could probably make different flavors, experiment with like black beans or like you said, azuki beans, or that kind of opens up a lot. And also grains are difficult for a lot of people to digest. So the fermentation process would definitely help with that, I'm assuming.
Yes. I mean, fermentation is a way of pre-digesting food so that nutrients are more bioavailable to us.
Great. That is great. So can you tell us what kind of projects you're doing on the bus right now? Like, what do you have fermenting back there?
Well, I have a few ales that I'm excited about right now. I have a sour cherry sour ale that I started in February, and I'll let it age for a year. And then I have a lambic that is strawberry blackcurrant lambic that I pitched with a yeast called Brettanomyces, which I'm really excited about. I started both of those in Brooklyn. I have a peach habanero mead and an elderflower mead. So all of these ingredients I've been harvesting through the past year since I've been on the road. The peaches were actually canned by a friend last summer, but they're local to where we lived in Michigan. I have water kefirs. I have a lot of fresh syrups right now. I'm in Wisconsin and it's berry season, so I've found a lot of black raspberries, also known as black caps around here, raspberries, sour cherries, black currants, what else?
I have a hard time getting a hold of real black currants. Anytime I try to order them, they're almost always like those little raisins instead. I had to go to a specialty website to find somewhere that had black currants, but I also found that they sold the plants, so I'm looking forward to getting those probably in the spring.
Yeah, well, come to Wisconsin. They're everywhere. I mean, it's really amazing. I'm actually in the driftless region right now, which is just, I mean, one of the most diverse areas I've been in, flora-wise, which has been really fun. Just a lot of wild plants to pick from and experiment with, and I'm really loving it here. But I have 3 misos going right now. I have an Atsuki bean, a black bean, and then I have a miso with red lentil, some soybeans and roasted barley. I'm making tempeh at this moment with some heirloom beans that were gifted to me last week. Jacob's cattle bean is one of them.
I like those.
Tiger's Eye is another, and I forget the name of the last one, but just mixing it up a little, adding barley and roasted walnuts in another. I always have dairy kefir. I have a lot of yogurt right now. I've been working with Viili, which is a Finnish yogurt strain. And then also Långfyll, which is, I think, a Swedish strain. I could be wrong on that. I have to double check. But yeah, I've had a lot of fun with dairy ferments lately. I've been meeting a lot of people in Wisconsin who have interesting starter cultures, which are kind of an obsession of mine. I like to, as I travel, collect different starter cultures that have interesting histories and prolong them and then share them as I keep traveling.
Yeah, I imagine Wisconsin and Minnesota and those areas up there, because they have a large Scandinavian population. I'll bet you anything that they have you could probably find some really amazing dairy cultures up there.
Yeah, and Wisconsin is the dairy state. I'm actually not too far from Organic Valley right now. It's literally like 15 miles west of where I'm parked, and they are the largest organic dairy collective in the United States, probably one of the biggest in the world. So that's pretty cool. And that's, of course, like I said, it's organic, so I'm sure it's not the biggest collective. I know it's not the biggest collective, but as far as like an organic dairy collective, it's pretty cool to be nearby it. So there are a lot of dairy ferments around here. A lot of interest in fermentation. It's been really a very positive experience.
Well, that's good. That's really good to know. My sister moved to Madison last year. Her husband was finishing his grad degree, or his grad school. So I'm going to have to ask her to send me some of those sour cherries and black currants. Okay, so I wanted to tell you about my first experience fermenting food, and it's mostly for the benefit of our listeners, but also this may help you as well. So it was back in 2006, and the herbalist I was mentored to at the time, she showed us how to make sauerkraut. And we did shredded beets and onions and cabbage, and we pounded it down with a wooden weight in these big bowls until the juice came out. And this is my very first experience with fermenting anything. And then we added the salt to it, and we packed it down in jars, and I put a cabbage leaf on top and then a weight. And then she told me to cover it in cheesecloth and twine and to leave it on the counter to ferment for about a week or two before checking on it. And this is back in Florida, where there's a lot of insects. So when I opened mine, it was this big moving pink mass. I almost threw up. My husband had to dispose of it for me. And since then I didn't let it stop me. I invested in the proper equipment, kind of like weights and an airlock, because I really didn't want that to happen again. And so far so good. I do sauerkraut on my own, probably once a month, and I make a sort of fermented soda. It's not water kefir. It's I catch the wild lactobacilli from the ginger roots, and I kind of feed it with a little bit of sugar every day. I don't know what it's called, but it tastes really good when we're done. Yeah, it's got a very mild alcohol, like maybe 1% or 2% or something. Very mild. Because if you let it ferment too long, it gets a lot more alcoholic. But yeah, we make that sometimes. So anyway, my point behind this is that fermentation's kind of gang of glay, as Robert Burns probably would have said. Mine went really awry my first time. And I don't think that that's uncommon. I've had my mother, she's tried to make fermentations and she didn't put any type of air release at all. And it wound up exploding like all over the place. She's done it a couple of times. I would have figured that she would remember the first time, but it happened again. So some of those can be a little more dangerous than others. I think that one's probably the only one I can think of as being dangerous, because I don't think most people would eat it if it looked bad. And that's the only way I can think of that it would be bad for you. So can you kind of go over some tips to keep things as foolproof as possible for first timers?
Yeah, well, first of all, you need to provide conditions that let lactobacillus thrive. So lactobacillus is a salt-loving organism. So first of all, you want to have enough salt so that you can, give it an environment where it stays happy. But you also don't want to salt it too much. Salt is responsible for flavor, as well as bringing this condition forward for lactobacillus, this environment for lactobacillus, and it's also for helping to draw the water from the vegetables. And we need to draw water from the vegetables so that we have a brine in which the vegetables can sit underneath, so that it stays an anaerobic process. So these are two of the most important aspects, is that you need to give lactobacillus an environment in which it's happy, and then you need to make sure that it's anaerobic, so that the vegetables are separated from oxygen via this brine. You also want to, once you have salted the vegetables to your liking so that it's tasty to you. I always say salt to taste. I don't give people a certain ratio. Vegetables are going to vary with how much salt you give them based on whether they've been sitting in cold storage all winter, or if they were harvested that morning. Okay, so water content will vary, which will make variable how much salt you add. So once you've done that, you make sure the brine, the juices are running from the cabbage, and then you simply pack it down into your jar. And putting cabbage leaves on top is very nice. That's what I do too. I like to have a layer of cabbage leaves in case mold does grow on the top. But then you want to use a weight so that your cabbage will stay below a brine. I use river rocks. That's my preference. I used to just use jars filled with water that would fit inside the mouth of the jar the cabbage was fermenting in. But now I use river rocks, and the rocks I use are smooth and non-porous. I wash them well, and I boil them for 15 to 20 minutes before each use. So I'm sterilizing them in some sense. And then I put a tea towel on top. I also sometimes use a plastic lid. I would not use cheesecloth because bugs can get through cheesecloth, and the idea of covering your ferment is so that dust and bugs don't get in, because it has to be open to some degree. You can't have an airtight container, and in the process, not only is lactic acid bacteria produced, but you're also, it is also producing CO2. So this is a gas, and as long as that gas is coming forth, it's going to need to breathe. So you can burp your jar, but it's easier to simply have a lid that is not airtight. I use the plastic ball lids that you can buy anywhere that you can find ball jars. But I'll also use a tea towel when I'm doing larger batches, like in a crock or in a gallon jar.
Yeah, for people that are brain deficient like me, maybe an airlock would be a good idea. That's what I wound up getting, because I kind of forgot to burp one of my jars on like my third or fourth go, and it kind of started sputtering purple juice everywhere.
An airlock? I mean, I don't use airlocks. not for airlocks because I'm producing in smaller batches, and I don't like having extra plastic stuff. So I just try to tell people, don't let an airlock, like the idea that you think you need an airlock, discourage you from just simply using a tea towel. Like, you don't need sophisticated tools to do this. People have been making sauerkraut for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yes.
You didn't have airlocks back then. So, as long as you remember that it's an anaerobic process and you need to, create this environment for lactic acid bacteria to survive and thrive, then you're going to be fine.
Now, could you address when they do find things like mold and mildew on top of, usually it's when it's just above the surface. Usually if I see mold, it's like right on the cabbage leaf and I can just throw it away and I scoop it off. And can you just reassure our listeners that kind of thing is okay, and maybe go over a little bit about finding mold?
Yeah, so mold, can be common when you're fermenting. It will grow on the top layer sometimes, especially if your vegetables are popping up above the brine. That's the common case where you're going to get some mold action or even some yeasty action. But you can just peel it off and eat what's underneath. This is where I like to use cabbage leaves, because I can just peel the cabbage leaves off. Otherwise, you're really scraping the top off with a fork. And then everything underneath is fine. I mean, it's just like cheese. If you get a little bit of mold on the outside of your cheese, you don't throw the whole block away. You would simply cut it off. Another thing I like to emphasize is people are always asking, well, what about the bacteria that is bad for me? Like, what if that gets in the mix? So when we work with lactic acid bacteria, also known as lactobacillus, we don't need to worry about the undesirable bacteria that we're thinking of, that we're afraid of. And that's because lactic acid bacteria is a very robust organism that, bacteria like E. coli, for example, cannot compete with. And any of the bacteria that we fear consuming too much of. It's just, there's a really great story of a cheesemaker who is also a nun. I believe this was in the 80s. And she had been fermenting cheese in a big wooden barrel for a very long time. And it was like a barrel that was passed down through generations, and her family had been cheesemakers. And one day the FDA was like, hey, you've got to start fermenting in stainless steel. This is totally unsanitary. There's, no way. You've got to switch. And she said, well, yeah, but this is what makes the cheese. My wooden barrel has been, it's given so much life to the cheeses that I've made over time. And so she did something really wild. She made 2 batches, one in a stainless steel container and one in her wooden barrel, and she inoculated them both with E. coli. The stainless steel batch was ruined, and the wooden barrel batch was fine. And that's because the lactobacillus from years and years of cheese production in that barrel just completely wiped the E. coli out. So, that's the strength of the organisms we work with in vegetable fermentation. And that's also why it's one of the safest and easiest ways to ferment food.
So what I was saying is, what would you recommend as a great first-time ferment for newbies? Would you recommend like a dairy or vegetable, or is there anything specifically that you always do, like sauerkraut or? Well,
as I've said, vegetable fermentation is one of the easiest, safest ways to ferment food. I definitely recommend starting with sauerkraut. It's a very enlightening process, simply because you're just adding adding salt and watching that vegetable bring forth the brine that you need to ferment it in. So, I mean, it's a really incredible process. The fact that you're able to like watch transformation from this very beginning elemental step and then watch that progress over the time of 3 weeks too.
Yeah.
I definitely recommend that. And I recommend doing your first sauerkraut in a glass jar so you can actually see that transformation as it's fermenting too.
Yeah, I remember watching the tiny bubbles going up the side of the liquid and just, every day being able to see it for the very first time, even if that batch was totally messed up. But, I remember watching it. I mean, you can see how it turns into something living. You're right, it is really cool. So I'm sure everybody would probably love to go to one of your workshops. Can you tell us about your basic tour plans? It looks like I just kind of missed you here in Kentucky, but I might catch you in Lexington if you go south again. And for our listeners in other areas, can you kind of give everyone an idea of where you're going this year?
Yeah, so I've been on the road for a year and 8 months, and I'll be getting home in October, and then I'll be home. So I'm in Wisconsin now. I'll be traveling through Minnesota, North Dakota, Montana, Washington State, and then I'll be in Portland, Oregon, Salem, Oregon, and Eugene, Oregon. So as far as Oregon is concerned, and a lot of cities in the states I just mentioned too. So that's the end of my tour. And then I'm home, which I'm excited for. That will be my 2-year mark. So living on the road has a lot of challenges, as I'm sure you can imagine. I was originally going to do this for 1 year. It turned into 2 years because people really, really enjoyed the work I do, which is great. I'm so happy for it. But yeah, I mean, my workshops are, I go over fermentation. We have a big tasting of different fermented foods I've made all around the country. And then I do a hands-on demo of the process of making usually sauerkraut, a type of sauerkraut. And then after the workshop is done, we go on the bus. And on the bus I have lots of starter cultures. And I sell my starter cultures. I also offer them for swap if someone brings me a jar of honey per se, which is always one of my favorite swappables because it's hard to find like raw local honey. Produced on a small scale, which is always the best honey you'll find. Or maybe they have an old sourdough culture that's been in their family for 100 years. That's some high quality swappables. That's a high quality swappable. But anyway, yeah, and then I have a map that kind of shows my entire route everywhere I've been over the past 20 months, and I have a library, so it's a very educational space. People can sit and read, converse about fermentation, and yeah, it's just an overall fun space that helps spark and continue the conversation of fermented foods. Why are they important? What do we want to learn about fermented foods? It's just a great discussion space that inspires a further deeper convo. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, so are you planning on going back out on the road after, or are you just going to stay home and work from home?
I have projects that I'm working on from home, so I'll announce my next tour. I haven't quite planned it out what I'll be doing tour-wise in the future, but at the earliest, it will be in 2017. So I'm working on a lot of big projects right now that I'll be announcing later in the year. If you would like to learn more, keep in touch with my work and what I'm doing in the next few years, you can join my mailing list through my website, which is fermentationonwheels.com. And yeah, you can stay updated on my whereabouts through that, and also stay updated about, future art endeavors, culinary endeavors, other creative endeavors of mine that are all going to be closely related to what I'm doing now. So, yeah.
I hope we get to talk to you again, maybe next year when you're home or, when you go out on the road again. And for our listeners, that's all the time we have for today. And until then, good night and God bless.
You've been listening to AgriCast Digest. If you like what you just heard, please share with your friends. And don't forget to go to ChickenCoopGuides.com/podcast to download transcripts and archives of this episode, as well as take advantage of any freebies or trials offered in this episode. You can then visit our private podcast Facebook page, also linked there. This has been a Bluebird Media production.